author of Beauty. Hello, everyone. I'm Christina Chu, author of Beauty, and it's really lovely here to have you here tonight for the VCCA Fireside Series. VCCA is an artist residency for writers, visual artists, and composers, and it has been a place that has built a community that have gotten to know each other and supported each other. And so I'm really excited because we have two incredible artists tonight. And it's really our pleasure on this really wintry, snowy day. If you're like me, you were outside snow shoveling all that snow. So it's nice to be by the fireside right now with this visual artist and writer. So we are going to introduce our first writer. Her name is Moira Linehan. Moira's second collection, Incarnate Grace, was published in 2015 by Southern Illinois University Press. After learning she had breast cancer, the poet struggled to live the examined life. We will talk about this later on. The collection was named an Honor Book in Poetry in 2016 by the Massachusetts Book Awards. Her debut collection, If No Moon, won the Crab's Orchard series in poetry. That collection chronicles the loss of her husband. In 2008, it was named an honor book in poetry in the Massachusetts Book Awards. Everyone, please welcome Moira.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you to the entire Virginia Center community for having me this evening. I'm going to read from my latest collection, which is titled And Company. This is a book about my grandmother, Marie Louise Rembo Washa. It's in her memory and in memory of her two daughters, Julienne and Odette, my mother, but it's also for Marie's two grandsons, Mark and Joe, for her great-grandsons, Christopher and Patrick and Henry, and now for her great-great-grandchildren, Theo and Beatrice and Slay. And the book is the story of my grandmother, who was a dress designer, dressmaker, a seamstress in Paris, and then in Boston. And so I have some history of women artists and the paintings of the time that my grandmother was alive. And I'm going to begin with a poem about Bert Morisot and Mary Cassatt. Before Bert Morisot and Mary Cassatt. Fugitive, the materials of their art made quickly in small notebooks, on wove paper that goods might have been wrapped in pencil sketch, sometimes pastel, a wash of watercolors. Colorful little pieces of the confines of home where they made their art, never alone, sisters-in-law, female cousins ever close by sofa, tea table, garden bench, no farther, far from boulevard, cafe, studio, the off-limits. Limited every aspect of their lives, mirrored rules for stepping out to dine, to dance, be seen. Scenes men painted in oils on large canvases, framed. Framework for the holding pattern till they married. Marriage, or at least the arrival of children, the end. Ending their artwork. Art gone fugitive. The next poem, Becoming, Bert Morisot and Mary Cassatt. And this is in the form of an acrostic, which means down the left-hand margin, there's a phrase that is spelled out. And in this case, that phrase is in the age of Renoir. And so this poem, Becoming Bert Morisot and Mary Cassatt, asks you to keep that in the back of your mind. Into what studio? For Bert Morisot, no such place for years. Her space to paint, that corner of the family's living room, her back to the rest of the house, but not alone, even there. In the early years, her sister at her side painting too. Their mother, their chaperone, goes with them to the Louvre. Even with the Monet name, Eugene, now her husband, more so, still has no studio of her own. Not till after he dies. On her own, no family financial support for her, Mary Cassatt rents a studio, paints work the salon accepts. Now enormous pressure to get commissions. One day she will notice Degas' pastels in a gallery window. One brushstroke after another, breath caught on canvas. If I could paint like that. Alone in her studio, risking her future, she prepares a fresh canvas. And sometimes I turn to an individual painting to tell some part of the story of my grandmother, Marie. And this story, this poem takes place in Boston. My grandmother and grandfather have emigrated from Paris. They have set up shop in downtown Boston, where he is a tailor and she is a seamstress. And this poem starts to explain the title of my collection and company. The painting that this poem is based on is The Seamstress by Joseph de Camp, and the poem, No Matter Where I Go. There's not a thread of connection to this solitary red-headed seamstress sitting by a window for the light, so much white light that the thin, tied-back, white-ruffled curtains hold a sheen, as does her sewing, creamy white gauze bunched on a polished round table by her side. Likely she's at work on another blouse, like the sheer one she's wearing, white on white design, distinct against the long sleeve, along the shawl collar, those imprints shining in the morning light. Likely she's finishing the hem, her right hand upturned, thumb and next two fingers gently tugging the thread, shortcut of thread, less likely to knot as she pulls it through. Not a thread of connection to the establishment across from the library on Boylston Street. My grandfather's sign painted across its wide window, Jules Washer and Company, his couturier wife thereby assigned to the background. So once again, I have to bring my grandmother forward, this time to stand at their gigantic cutting table, unrolling fabric woven in Lyon or Lille, fabric she'd selected earlier in the year when she was in Paris for the haute couture shows. She, about her work, copying one of the many dresses she'd purchased on that trip, now measuring, remeasuring before cutting one piece at a time. My grandmother constantly moving between cutting table and customer arrived for her first fitting, keeping an eye on the three girls who work the machines, sew each seam, hem each piece, attending to the postman, the city inspectors, the copy for newspaper ads, receiving Madame returned for her final fitting for her finished evening dress, greeting women who want appointments of their own to be dressed by her. No thread of connection, unless this red-headed seamstress is the woman my mother would become, my grandmother turning her daughter's care, long days into evenings, over to her mother. It was really my grandmother who raised me, my mother once told me. My grandmother, missing my mother's every first, letter and number, word and step, fall and fear, ribbons and honors. But alongside my mother day and night, her grandmother, teaching her to be proper and French, prayerful and artist, knitter and weaver, solitary. My mother who'd always be waiting for my return, no matter where I'd gone. There is no thread. When I look closely again at this painting, not even a needle in the seamstress's hand. No matter where I go, always so much to fill in. And here's another poem which further explains the title of And Company for this collection. Ampersand. Around even at the time of the famous eruption of Vesuvius, an ampersand on a wall that survived, scribes writing in cursive, the custom of fusing letters, in this case E and T for and, using shortcuts even in those times to save time, save parchment, or maybe just to feel the flourish of those letters' tails wavering through and out her fingers. Such a feminine symbol, my friend Mary said. And right away, I see what a corset did to women's waists. Or for another variation on this theme, two letters bound like that, termed a ligature. So for my grandmother, she too, bound in marriage, bound in business to Jules Washer, she the and company in Jules Washer and Company. She put in writing as a never named, as in some luxurious ampersands, the E and T barely are visible, if at all. Who was she? I, no seamstress, to this day unable to close the distance between us. And I want to close with a poem about craft. All the artists whose work is 9/10 preparation. So I'm going to be talking about my grandmother's work, but the title of this poem is Ars Poetica, and so it's a poem about making poems too. Ars Poetica. 9/10 preparation, this artist work. First, fabric between thumb and forefinger, feeling weight, texture, give, nap. The planning beforehand, washing washable textiles to shrink them before they're sewn, laying out the pattern so the design flows, the plaid lines match, the dress drapes, shears sharp so the seams won't pucker, twist, ravel, the seamstress's stress. Then the fitting, the pinning and repinning those seams. Right shade of thread? The sewing, seemingly magic, not one stitch visible. Each seam, steamed pressed flat, till at last the sewn carries material and a dressmaker's vision out into the world, all in one piece, seamlessly. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Wow, that was knocked me out. That was so beautiful.
Thank you, Christina.
Wow. I mean, I adore reading about fashion. And in fact, my last book was about a character who she goes into fashion, she becomes a designer. And I didn't know anything about fashion, so I had to research, right? And I just find it so fascinating that you actually had this in your family. What was that like?
I knew nothing. I had to do, I mean, I started this book in 2015. I knew nothing about fashion history, the fashion world. And, you know, right now, I mean, I could have my pajama bottoms on, you know, sort of for all the fashion that's going on, you know, during COVID.
That is lovely. So a lot of this most of this is researched.
Yes, and again, I did not know my grandmother, so there, you know, as I'm making things up as I'm going along. Very few facts that I have about her.
Wonderful. Can you talk a little bit about how you, as a poet, determine which facts and which creations are become yours? Like, how does that process work?
Well, you know, sort of the book is anchored in the places where I know that my grandmother lived. So she was born southwest of Paris, And I know she worked in Paris. I have an address where she lived in Paris. But I have to, first of all, get her from the town where she was born into Paris, so I put her on a train, so I have a whole poem about, how she's dressed and what she's looking like and what her dreams are. And so I get her in Paris. And then I have to rewrite a second poem, take two, because I realized I put her on a train, but I didn't have somebody to meet her. I mean, she can't just get into the city in those times, in the late 1800s and be on her own. So some of that I have to just say, well, history proves she found a room of her own. And then I sort of go on to, then she has to somehow meet my grandfather. And he was a tailor, I know that. He was born in Budapest. And I know that he walked a good way of his trip from Budapest to Paris. So I have to have them meet some way. And what I decide to do, and I'm making this up, they meet in the shop where the both of them go to buy their wool. And so the merchant, quote, approves of the way they're dressed, the kind of material that they're choosing, and he feels that it's appropriate to introduce them. So, I'm making that up as that's how they got together.
That's lovely. Absolutely. Actually, I can see that happening. When I actually make shoes and boots, and whenever I go to the leather supply areas, and especially when I go to get my leather, I always get it from this one place because of the quality, right? And whenever I go in there, I always see all these other designers come in. Yeah. And that's how that becomes where people meet, right? All the, if you're in fashion, right? So it's so interesting. How long were you working on this collection?
I was working intensely. I was doing a lot of reading at the beginning of 2015. I then had a residency at a place in Brooklyn for 2 weeks, a place called the Erie, and I'm indebted to its director, Margot Farrington, for selecting me to be there for 2 weeks, because then I had easy or reasonable access to the museums in New York. And so then after that stay, I was doing more intensive writing through the next 2 years, essentially. And I was, sort of going step by step. For any painting that I use in the book, I had to have seen it in real time. I wasn't just using a computer. And then the problem became, how do I order these poems? How do I begin? How do I join them? And I also had the help of an editor working with me on that.
So you basically wrote one poem and then kind of built up this collection.
I was writing poems. I wasn't ordering it as I was writing. I was looking at paintings and just simply seeing how I was attracted to them, how I could maybe use them. And as I was doing my reading, I picked up people who I became interested in, and was thinking about, well, I could write about them. Yeah, the problem was stopping, because it's such a rich time.
Oh yes. So with all the research that you were doing, well, I imagine every single project you do is heavily researched, like this one.
No. Okay. No. I see myself many times as a landscape poet. And so some of my work is set in Ireland. And, so it's through being in that landscape and what happens when I'm there.
Well, actually, a lot of your poetry read to me a little bit like landscape poetry, because you were describing the way you would describe the corset and the ligature and like the printing and the dressmaker's vision, and how everything's laid out, and it was absolutely beautiful.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely beautiful. So what is the next process, part of your process? Is it moving on to the next book, or will you be continuing, with fashion, or a relative, or what are you thinking? How does the process work for you?
In all honesty, this book and company came out in December. And in June, I had another book come out. So my life got turned around in the sense that I did a lot of editing, proofing, more proofing, proofing again, proofing typeset copy. And I have been making poems, new poems, just simply, if I read something, I'm just spending time not being under pressure of having to do X or Y or Z, but trying to do some reading on my own, catching up on, books that I've, piled up. And I don't yet have a specific project like this one about my grandmother. I don't have that yet in focus.
I love that line, by the way, and co, and how you talk about how she's never really named, but
And company, yeah.
that,
But I mean, that was the case for so many women.
that's right. That basically encapsulates how women were kind of invisibilized, I guess, right? What they gave to each project, right? Really lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your
Well,
reception.
that was so beautiful. Thank you. So let's move on, and our next visual artist is Helina Metaferia.
Helina.
Helina. Oh, sorry. So she is an interdisciplinary artist working across performance, video, installation, collage, and social engagement. Through a hybrid of mediums, she tells overlooked stories that center Black bodies in positions of power and vulnerability. As an Ethiopian American, her work draws upon traditional African art sensibilities, where visual art and ritual often intersect. Her work interrogates complex histories of institutionalized and systemic oppression. Everyone, you are in for a treat. Helina?
Hi, everyone. Oh, thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you to VCCA for having me here as an alumni of the residency, talking about my work. And it's really a pleasure. It's a full circle moment to me because I happen to be exhibiting work that I made at VCCA for my current solo show at NYU's The Gallatin Gallery. And so when I got this invitation to present, I was thinking, oh, how wonderful, because this gives me a chance to show what I've been working on when I was at VCCA in 2018 as an artist in resident. So I'm going to present now, and I can bring up some slides, actually. I'm going to present about my project, Middle Passage for Dreams. I am an interdisciplinary artist, so I work across a range of mediums in the visual and performance art. And those mediums include collage and assemblage, but also video, social practice, and performance. And this is a 3-year project that I did from 2016 to 2019. At that period of time, I was living a lot at residencies. It was a way for me to make work right out of graduate school. I had graduated in 2015 in a way that could support me in my practice with ample studio space and all the great supports that come from residencies. So it was an interesting time, and this is just some stills from the current solo show at NYU. It was an interesting time for me to explore bodies in space and sites that are out of the ordinary. I usually live in urban centers, so to be in these sort of more scenic, what I consider like serene landscapes, provided me a place for deep contemplation, but I also started to think a lot about what it means to exist in these spaces. I'll first start by saying you know, this is a COVID-friendly show at NYU. So it's in the Gallatin Galleries, right at the heart of Manhattan. And it is a 6-channel video installation that you can experience from the sidewalk. So it is sidewalk accessible. You do not have to go into the gallery to experience it. You can experience it safely 6 feet away. And this show, also, you can hear the sounds from the street. So it becomes a public art project. And it's a really great juxtaposition because I filmed this over 3 years in all 4 seasons. So you get to see all 4 seasons changing. And it's on display from January till April. So you get the sensibility of like, these seasons are not what is being experienced right now in New York with the terrible snowstorm that's happening. So a little bit more about this project, you know, when I was kind of thinking about what it means to access space, and particularly space that is often considered like these benevolent landscapes, I was also thinking about what it means to have privilege to access space from a position of rest, as opposed to a position of labor, in which, or around the spectacles of death, which often Black bodies are associated with in media very too often, even more so now than ever. And how many generations it might have taken essentially to have that freedom to be a creative. You know, how many generations in my own family being Ethiopian American to come to this country and to be able to experience that wealth, but also for Black bodies in this country with the histories of slavery and oppression and all of these things. And so as I was making this work, I was able to amplify the voices of the creatives that I was in conversation with, that I had met in these residency experiences. And these are artists, these are thinkers, and giving them a platform to articulate what it means for them to be a creative, a Black person at this time. And I did it in a way where these kind of these images of mortality, of death, start to become transformed into Black rest, Black joy, Black love, Black liberation. And I'm thinking a lot about this conversation around Black futures and what it means to envision a radically different future than what it is that we are seeing today. Whose imagination are we in? And how can we expand that imagination to think beyond systems of white supremacy and white institutionalized racism? And so as I was making this project, so much had changed over time in these secluded residency environments, or these natural landscapes all over the country. You know, there was, at the same time, there was death in the media. And so I was trying to grapple like what it means to feel abundant and also quite limited and confined. And so when I think of these landscapes, I see these oceans and I see, you know, this idea of abundance and what nature can offer. But then I also see like the Middle Passage, right, with the transatlantic slave trade, or I see trees and I see like, you know, lynchings. And so the kind of the horrors of the American story juxtaposed with the American dream, which, you know, all, whether you're an immigrant, you know, everyone here are descendants of some sort of immigrant or forced migration, unless you're of a native. And so, like, what does it mean to have those dreams of the freedoms that, you know, this country was sort of founded on, but then like the histories of the genocide and the histories of enslavement being right there hand in hand. So I'm not going to talk too much longer because I do want to show a short clip of what I had made specifically at VCCA. I was there in the summer of 2018, and these are some stills from that. So I'll just show the clip now.
It started raining that night. It was just pouring rain, and I was walking all over this place in the rain singing, so no one could hear me but me. And it was just like the most breathtaking moment when I didn't know what was going to come next or what I was going to create, either like as a creative person or like what life I was going to create for myself. But everything seemed possible and also breakable.
I think of artists as prophets in the sense that I think that our call and our responsibility is to imagine and see and listen to and wait for and invoke a future iteration of the world that is real and is tangible, but just hasn't fully materialized yet. And then we name that and we show people what that looks like in the art, because that future is coming, whether we want it to or not. We shape what the particular permutation of that future looks like. It's about letting people know what's ahead and imagining those possibilities and calling them by name.
What I imagine freedom to actually be is a process. There are elements of like liberation and freedom that have to do with infrastructure and structural spaces, but I also think that individually and collectively we still have to operate. The aspirational element of freedom for me really has to do with unlearning a lot of messages of shame and blame and vulnerability and insecurity.
I think for me, the future for Black people is one where there isn't fear of anything. We can have joy that isn't only meaningful because of the pain that we endure collectively or individually. So, yeah, no fear.
So that video was shot, there's 5 segments to that video. Each segment's about 3 to 5 minutes, and it was shot on all 4 seasons at 5 different locations. And I want to thank all of the artists who were in each of the segments and so vulnerably trusted me with their stories. And yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions. Oh, and a full screening of that video, will be online on March 4th through Gallatin Galleries. I'm actually going to drop the link in the chat. So if you just go to the gallery website, Gallatin Galleries website, it'll be streamed there March 4th at 7 p.m. And then followed by a conversation between me and Steve Locke, who is another amazing artist based in New York.
Helina, you should definitely put that on Facebook, especially in the VCCA Fellows Facebook page, so that all the fellows have a chance to find it if they aren't watching this, because I'm sure they will want to see it. That was extraordinary and really beautiful. To begin with, all that last segment was shot at VCCA, and since VCCA has been closed since COVID, it really, I don't know about anyone else who's out there, but it really made me miss VCCA and the amount of work and the quality of work I was able to do there. And just looking at the pieces that you did there, Helina, it's the value of having an artist residency to go to and do your work it's just astounding what you were able to accomplish. These other artists that you met, did you talk about this project before you started doing it? How did you go about? I know you're interdis and you involve many different things, but do you actually think about those things before you start a project, or do you video what you can first?
Well, I mean, I have to get people to want to join me. So there's a bit of relationship building, and you've experienced residencies. I mean, I do this outside of residencies as well. And I guess it's considered the social practice part of my project, where there's building trust in community and trying to be of integrity and ethics around carrying people's stories in my work. So I hadn't known Sarah, Natasha, or Lauren before that experience, and I was only there for 2 weeks anyway. And I think I was totally sick my first week, by the way. I just was out of it and couldn't do anything. But I think around the end of my time there, I had asked them, hey, I'm doing this project. I was actually working on another project, but I was like, this is an ongoing thing that's kind of in the background. It'll take a day. Not even a day, like a couple hours. Do you have a couple hours to spare? And by that point, we had already built a bond and connection. And so it was a matter of, revealing that from the camera. And I did all the handwork and all the post-production. I was like a one-person shop for that video, which, has its pros and cons. But I think, the way I start was, it started in 2016 when I was at a program called Skowhegan, and that was a 9-month program or 9-week program. So I really got time to get to know people and develop that. But afterwards, I already had a structure. And then usually when I'm inviting people to present, to participate, I'll show them an excerpt of what I've done before to help build that trust. And also to say what the project is about, why it's important, why it's relevant. And I would love to hear your words. It's almost like a time capsule for a period of time. That's how I look at my videos that are more oral history or oral essays, video essays. It's like capturing a moment, and that moment will leave. COVID is a moment, and then hopefully it will leave. And so there are other ways that artists can document time.
What I found so poignant was a lot of the things that some of the artists actually spoke about, I thought were, even though they really talked about the Black experience and Black bodies and what it's freedom and, living a future that is basically self-created, right? And not from the dominant culture. What it was so striking to me is these are thoughts that I have had too, and to hear someone articulating that I'm not Black, but I so related to it. It was so moving to me that she said those things. And actually 2 of the different artists spoke about it. And your work in general, like this whole, everything is sort of juxtaposed, like right you have images of the beach and the water, but then the ideas of the transport and trees and the beauty of trees and the just juxtaposition of lynchings. And it's so interesting how art can have so many meanings depending on the context that you're giving to it. How do you decide when you come to each project? Do you have ideas ahead of time about what you're going to be working on? Like, how do you, like that first series of images, how did you know that was going to be photographs versus video, or is it video?
Yeah, it's video. These are video stills. Yeah, that's a good question. I think, especially because I work interdisciplinary, I'm always interested in the medium that would help the concept be most effectively articulated. And so I'm an artist with a conceptual more twist. And so video felt like a way, again, to document time, and I could do things abstractly with just moving image and more literally through language, and it could do both. And I think it was interesting, your point about connecting to it. I think that's always what I'm interested in, is like people from different backgrounds who can empathize or can see themselves in the subject or the content. I think that's the power of art in telling our stories, is to get people to re-examine their own attitudes or thinking, or to identify with another person who may have a different background. And so it's affirming to hear that.
Well, I think the best art does that.
Yeah.
Right. What I love is that while all of your work is beautiful, there's just it just said so much just from those images. It's remarkable to me. And then what the artist actually said during those stills, it was just mind blowing. I mean, and you captured the stillness at VCCA and the tranquility and those moments too of total connection with other artists and being able to speak a certain language that I think you don't get just anywhere. You get them probably just at residencies or at places where a lot of artists hang out.
Or yeah, if you can also just artificially create it for yourself, if you have the means to do that, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm currently in Los Angeles in like a getaway from New York residency that I made on my own, and having those. Yeah, I'm having those conversations now with folks, but I've created it outside of a residency experience, and I'm happy to be able to have done that successfully and to have a studio out here and to do all of that. Sometimes it's great to be able to apply and to get into something, and it's also great to like use your own means to facilitate those experiences. So I'm currently working in LA on a project with some of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement, and getting their stories and their images. And it's been really exciting and fun.
What exactly are you working on? Are you working on this project and then when you come back to New York working on something else?
Well, this is a body of work that's parallel to the work, the moving image work. I have an upcoming solo show at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston in the fall of 2021. So this is part of that body of work. That body of work is called By Way of Revolution, which you can see more of on my website. But yeah, I think one thing always leads into the next. And I'm also monitoring the chat, and somebody was asking like, will I be working differently post-COVID because of this time? And absolutely, I think we all have to. I've had to adapt and shift, especially because of my work dealing so much with relationships and people and social justice and social practice, and kind of that component had to shift during social distancing. But these other great things have happened. Like I was able to make this sort of project happen here in Los Angeles. I just couldn't do all the traveling that I was doing before. I had to stay put in the city and harness those relationships. And then the other, sorry, I'm just taking over.
Get the questions from Anthony.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about your work with the Wide Awakes? And can you talk about some of the amazing things you've seen from the upcoming Black artist generation?
Okay. Hey, Anthony. Anthony was in this project, No Passage for Dreams. I did the Bemis residency with him, and he's amazing. Yeah, so the Wide Awakes is a movement of artists and activists and just people who are interested in seeing the world get better. And they're all over the world. And there's, a lot of us are in New York City. And so a lot of this time for me has been about protests and being in the street and using art as a method to get issues of justice across. And so that has been really invigorating, working with the Wide Awakes, and some amazing things that I've seen from the upcoming Black artist generation. I also think like right now, and this is interesting because I'm speaking with an organization and institution, but I've actually been renewed by like artist run initiatives, because when everybody else had to close, I've seen artists do amazing things. I mean, the Wide Awakes is like the brainchild of like Hank Willis Thomas, who's an artist, and Jose Parla, and like Eric Gottsman, like several other folks from Four Freedoms. And they just kind of did this thing, and it was probably even more amazing than what I've seen come out of institutions, because they didn't have a turnaround time that was like, they just self-funded it, right? Or like got other people to buy in and contribute. And very similarly, there's so many other artist-run collectives that I've started to participate in, meeting over Zoom with people all over the world. And I'm really renewed by that. And in terms of like what upcoming Black artists are doing, I'm interested in this conversation around Black futures and taking up space and not seeking permission to do that. And so that's, we've seen that with this like decentralized movement with the Black Lives Matter movement that's really in the last, several years has been taking off. But in so many other forms of activism, it's not the same activism or artwork that was made in the 60s or 70s. It's a much more decentralized and DIY sort of approach. And with the internet, you can reach folks in a much more rapid way.
What I love is that so much of art has the social activism has become so much more a part of art in every genre, whether it be writing or otherwise. It's just so wonderful to see, and questions of identity and belonging and issues of when you talk about Black futures, it's so interesting to me because I think, I am one of these people who thinks like, why should I believe that a future is going to be doomed? Like, because basically people are trying to pin you into that little cage, right? Like, I want to see the future that I see, like I want to create. And I love hearing that. I can't wait to see more of your work. Thank you so much. Everyone, Kim is going to be adding everyone's, both Helina's and Moira's links and connections. So please look them up. It sounds like Helina has a bunch of shows coming up. I'm definitely getting over to NYU to see him. Hope to see you there. And thank you so much for joining us at the Fireside Series. This is what we get at VCCA. We usually do this around the fireplace at night. We get to see this incredible work. I mean, I feel so lucky that I was here tonight and able to talk with these artists. It's just a wonderful world where I guess if you weren't an artist, you wouldn't understand how enriching and beautiful it is. But you've got a piece of it tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great evening.